An unexpected meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy, protests in Tbilisi, and Tucker Carlson back in Moscow. This is week 145 of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I'm Anna Belokur, reporting to you from Kyiv, and I'll be taking you through the top stories of the week. Firstly, I want to acknowledge that something huge happened last night. Syrian rebels ousted the Russian-backed Assad regime from power in Syria. This is a historic event with far-reaching consequences and a lot of speculation about how Russia's war in Ukraine may have been a contributing factor to the weakening Assad regime, as well as how both wars could play out going forward. We'll be addressing Syria in more detail next week as more information emerges. On relatively short notice, it was announced on Friday that President Volodymyr Zelenskyy would potentially meet with incoming U.S. President Donald Trump at the reopening of Paris's Notre Dame the following day. The meeting did indeed take place, with Zelenskyy, Trump, and French President Emmanuel Macron speaking for about 35 minutes yesterday, in what Zelenskyy called a productive and meaningful conversation. Zelenskyy said that the three leaders spoke about our people, the situation on the ground, and a just peace. This marks the first face-to-face meeting with Trump since Trump's re-election, and to be fair, it seems to have been a smooth one. Also yesterday, the Pentagon announced a $988 million aid package for Ukraine, including drones and ammunition for HIMARS rocket launchers. The package will be pulled through the remaining $2 billion in funding from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, a program for supplying arms to Ukraine through contracts with U.S. defense companies. There is still a total of $5 billion in promised military aid that hasn't been delivered to Ukraine yet. On Wednesday, outgoing Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Ukraine is set to receive $50 billion in frozen Russian assets held by the United States and the EU sometime this month. However, also on Wednesday, House Speaker Mike Johnson said that he will not put a request for an additional $24 billion in aid to Ukraine to a vote, which followed reports that Biden has been quietly asking Congress to approve further aid before he leaves office. Earlier in the week, a Ukrainian delegation led by presidential office head Andriy Yermak traveled to Washington, D.C. to meet with top incoming government officials and advisors to Trump, including incoming Vice President J.D. Vance, who has been one of the most vocal critics of aid to Ukraine. A source told CNN that these meetings were not intended as diplomatic negotiations, but rather a wake-up call about the current situation on the battlefield in Ukraine. The source added that the Ukrainian delegation was pleased with how the talks went, feeling that they had accurately conveyed their assessments to the relevant people. Political protests in Georgia have escalated this week, with thousands of citizens taking to the streets in protest against the ruling government's increasingly authoritarian pro-Russian tilt. This escalation comes in the wake of the October parliamentary elections, in which the ruling Moscow-sympathetic Georgian Dream Party won, amid allegations of election fraud. Following the win, Georgian Dream decided to pause the country's EU accession process until 2028. While Georgia has historically sought closer ties with NATO, especially after Russia's 2008 invasion of two of its regions, the Georgian Dream Party and its oligarch leader indicate a growing closeness with Russia, one that its citizens take issue with. These protests started in early 2023 and have been gaining momentum ever since, with thousands participating in cities around Georgia. Both Euromaidan and the ongoing Georgian protests have seen young people playing a central role. In both cases, there's a post-Soviet generation that grew up with the hopes of joining the European family of nations, was eager to see the progressive reforms in governance, rule of law, and human rights, and is ready to fight back. So, in short, a few million Georgians have proved capable of something that Russia, with a population 35 times larger, is not willing to do: taking to the streets to stand up to the Kremlin's authoritarianism. The Kyiv Independent just turned 3 years old, and for our birthday month, we started a month-long campaign to reach 1,000 new members. With your help, we got there early. Our campaign ends next week, so you can still join. The more members we get, the more independent news you'll hear from Ukraine. Tucker Carlson, the far-right American commentator who famously traveled to Russia this year to interview Vladimir Putin, announced a return to Moscow this week to interview Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov. In a repeat of his interview with Putin, Carlson allowed Lavrov to ramble for an hour about a revised, Russian-centric version of history with very little pushback. It seems like Carlson may even have gone into the interview with an angle to get Lavrov to blame the outgoing Biden administration for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Speaking about the invasion, Lavrov repeated the Kremlin's assertion that the Ukrainian government has been illegitimate since the Euromaidan revolution over a decade ago, which he referred to as a coup. To echo our last story, the Euromaidan protests were a demonstration of resistance against the Kremlin's interference in the modern Ukrainian government. Ukraine has had 2 presidential and 2 parliamentary elections since then, changing 2 presidents and 4 prime ministers. Lavrov was actually more hesitant than Carlson to engage in World War III nuclear hypothesizing, saying that the West was provoking such a conflict while Russia only seeks to defend itself. He claimed that Russia has a vested interest in the people of Ukraine, while the West only wants its natural resources.
We care about people, not about natural resources, which somebody in the United States would like to keep. And to have Ukrainians just as servants sitting on these natural resources.
In a familiar display of boundless cynicism, a representative of the Russian regime, whose aggression has killed tens of thousands of Ukrainians, claims that they care about people. And speaking of natural resources, just a reminder that the Wall Street Journal found that Moscow has earned at least $1 billion selling stolen Ukrainian grain. Lavrov also denied Russia's involvement in the 2020 poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, who survived the poisoning attempt but died in a Russian prison in February of this year. Lavrov even insinuated that Germany, where Navalny was treated after the poisoning, did something to him that might have led to his death, providing no evidence. All in all, the interview was exactly what you'd expect if you give a top Kremlin official the floor and don't ask any hard questions. There's no way that the Kremlin would ever agree to something like this unless they reserve the right to pick the questions, pick the answers, and dictate the conversation. This interview, like the last one, was a show of Russian propaganda directly to American audiences. That brings me to a slightly different story that happened this week with some similar themes but different outcomes. This one involves Johnny Harris, a popular American YouTuber who makes videos about geopolitics, history, language, conspiracy theories, and more. He has over 6 million subscribers here on YouTube and is considered by many to be a relatively thorough and diligent researcher, although he has drawn criticism from experts in the past for oversimplifying complex subjects and overdramatizing for effect. It still came as a shock, though, when he released a video this week called "Why People Blame America for the War in Ukraine," in which he described how Russia had been driven to its current state of affairs by NATO. The video didn't just contain insensitive overtones, but blatantly wrong information, particularly concerning NATO expansion following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The version of history that Harris presented didn't fit with any narrative except Moscow's, offending his Eastern European viewers, including Ukrainians, and calling into question Harris's motivations in producing a video that painted Russia as a victim. Within 2 days, Harris had received so much backlash that he took the video down and released an apology, in which he acknowledged that he had gotten things wrong, hadn't done his due diligence in researching the video, and would be remaking it in line with viewer feedback.
Hey everyone, I am taking down the video that I published earlier this week on NATO and Russia. It was clear to me from a lot of these comments, mostly from Eastern Europeans, that I omitted the valuable perspective from these Eastern European countries that were a huge part of this story.
I wanted to talk about the Johnny Harris video after the Tucker Carlson interview because although both involved a popular American commentator with authority among their audience coming out in sympathy for Russia, it is not at all insignificant that one took feedback from Russia's victims, reflected, and apologized. This is an era where entertainment, journalism, and politics exist in an unregulated digital space, where funding isn't always transparent and engagement and expediency are often prioritized over thoroughness. It's essential that those who posit themselves as experts are willing to have these conversations and admit when they're wrong. something I highly doubt we're going to see from Carlson after his luxury trips to Moscow. That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday with more news from Ukraine. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this channel. Your support is what allows us to bring you independent, unbiased news about Russia's brutal invasion, which we are committed to doing no matter how much uncertainty the world faces. If you'd like to become a member of the Kyiv Independent community, please visit the link in the description below. I'll see you next week.